Ave Maris Stella.
Hello and welcome back to Vatican II in a Year. This is your host, Father Matthew Schneider. I am a priest of the Church of Christ and I teach theology. This is a podcast on the Starcrest Production Network at sqpn.com. Today we're on day 124 and we're covering Christus Dominus 8-10 on bishops in relationship to the Holy See or the Vatican. If you want to follow along, we have a reading plan and more details at sqpn.com/Vatican, frmatthewlc.com/Vatican. I just want to make a slight side note before getting into today. I've gotten a few messages via my own the contact form on my website saying, hey, slow down a little bit. Sorry, I'm trying to. I know I talk a little fast in general, and then when I don't have other people there, it can be worse. One of the things I am doing, which hopefully is helping, is you can't hear it, but I have a very slow metronome going at 50 beats per minute, which is just under 1 per second as I'm recording this. So it will hopefully slow me down a little bit. I apologize. I know that could be a difficulty. One thing you can do though, is a lot of podcast apps let you turn it down to 90% speed. If that is the issue, I apologize though. I am really trying to slow it down a little bit because I do know I talk fast. So anyways, yesterday we talked about the bishops need to take care of the whole church through their action. Today we're going to finish chapter 1, the relationship of the bishops to the universal church, and we're going to have all of section 1.2, which is on bishops and the apostolic see. This is balancing between the Pope and the bishops, plus a more universal charism, a more universal curia. I had my notes here. I had a typo and it said amore universal curia, amore, like the Italian word for love, which is just and then amor. But obviously that's not what we mean. But anyways, let's get into it with paragraph 8, which is talking about the relationship between the diocesan bishop and Rome and that kind of balance where both have power. The bishop has power, but then the Pope but it does not take away from the Pope's power. Let's read it. Oh, there's 2 parts. 8a. 2 bishops, the successors of the apostles, and the diocese entrusted them. There belongs per se all the ordinary power, proper and immediate authority, which is required for the exercise of their pastoral office. But this is never in any way infringes upon the power which the Roman pontiff has by virtue of his office, of reserving case to himself or to some other authority. 8b. The general law of the Church grants the faculty to each diocesan bishop to dispense in particular case the faithful over whom they legally exercise authority as often as they judge that it contributes to their spiritual welfare, except in those cases which have been especially reserved by the supreme authority of the Church. Right? So let's deal with 8a first, right? That bishop has that real authority, right? He has the authority needed to effect change. He can manage things in his diocese. Within his diocese, he basically has that power to do anything. Now, at the same time, the Pope still has the power to intervene. This is kind of interesting because in our kind of power structure, you usually have levels of power and it's not like the one who can come in and things like that. And the authority of the lower one is delegated by the higher one, right? So the middle manager is delegated by the CEO or the vice president or something. Whereas here, the bishop has the power in his own authority, but then the Pope can intervene in a way. It's a little difficult to understand, but that's right. So it's in some ways you can think of it like an army where this colonel or whatever has this authority over this base, but the general can step in, right? Because we are the church militant, right? We are the church fighting, in this world. We are the militant church, right? We talked about it, right? Beforehand, church triumphant heaven, church suffering purgatory, church militant, all of us here on earth. 8b really talks about the idea of dispensation or dispensing, right? So the bishop has the power to dispense in particular cases. So dispensing means to do away with a law or to do away with some prior action, right? It's suspending that rule in a particular case, right? Now, I'll give you an example of one that, at least one bishop does every year, where it's there's a huge blizzard on Saturday night, and the bishop says, hey, you're all dispensed from the Sunday obligation for this Sunday. I don't want the old ladies in the diocese to get into a car wreck because they're trying to get to Mass when there's huge snowstorms. Now, in a case like that, the obligation is to make a reasonable effort to get to Mass on Sunday. So, for example, if there is a blizzard, even if it's not dispensed, if there's no way, if you live several miles from the church and there's no way for you to drive there reasonably because of unforeseen circumstances like a blizzard, you are not obliged. But it's good for the bishop to still dispense it there, right? So it's extra clear that it's not required. And the bishop can dispense some irregularities. For example, if a Catholic and Orthodox get married and they want to get married in the Orthodox Church, that's not usually allowed, but the bishop can dispense that. Now, on the other hand, certain things are reserved to the Holy See, to the Pope, right? For example, if somebody in the religious community wants released from their vows, they need to be from final vows, not temporary vows. Temporary vows can be released by the community. By final vows, they need to get approval from the Vatican, right? Or, for example, if somebody who's a priest wants to leave the priesthood, they need that from the Vatican. The bishop can't give that. Those are cases of dispensation from the Vatican, reserved to the Vatican. There's some others, but those are some of the more well-known cases, and I'm not going to go into every detail. I'm just kind of giving these as examples of what these numbers talking about. We talk about dispensing from norms. Dispensing from norms can even be at local parish level. For example, most dioceses have things like, the bishop, the pastor can dispense a parishioner from things like, hey, you're supposed to kneel at the consecration, right? So if he has bad knees, like, yeah, you can just sit there, right? It's no issue, right? Like my dad, who has 2 artificial knees, he can sit during the consecration, right? He's not required to kneel, and his pastor is exempted from that, right? Because he's, when you're that old and you have 2 artificial knees, kneeling is probably not healthy for you. But he doesn't just stand up because he'd stand out. He kind of sits down discreetly, right? Anyway, so I don't know if my dad wanted me to share that, but I already did. So anyway, paragraph 9 is about the Curia and how the Curia helps the Pope exercise power. It's got A and B again, so let's read it. 9a. In exercising supreme, full, and immediate power in the universal church, the Roman Pontiff makes use of departments of the Roman Curia, which, therefore, perform their duties in his name and with his authority for the good of the church, and in service to the sacred pastors. 9b. The fathers of the Sacred Council, however, desire that these departments, which have furnished distinguished assistance to the Roman Pontiff in the past of the church, be reorganized and better adapted to the needs of times, regions, and rites, especially as regards their number, name, competence, and peculiar method of procedure, as well as the coordination of work among them. The fathers also desire that, in view of the very nature of the pastoral office proper to the bishop, the office of legates of the Roman Pontiff be more precisely determined. Right, so you may have heard of this, the Curia, right, in Rome. It's these offices in Rome that help out the Pope and to do his governing, and they often work on behalf of the Pope. Sometimes they can exercise authority, right? So we talked about, a priest being allowed to leave the priesthood, if he requests it, right? So the Pope doesn't individually look at every single one, right? He has one of the cardinals who's in charge, with several priests and other people in the office in charge of the office for priests, right? Who you can ask that from, right? And there's a bunch of different offices. A lot of them are based on states of life, right? There's an office for bishops, right? We talked the person we talked to, Father Dermot, worked in there for a while. They have the office for laity, the office for religious and other consecrated life, etc., right? You have the apostolic penitentiary, which is for all the things of complicated confessional questions. You have the Dicastery for the Doctrine of Faith, talking about teaching of the church and theologians and things like that. And the bishops of Vatican II wanted them reorganized. They also wanted clarity on what pertains to the Pope, right? Before Vatican II, there was a vision among many of the bishops not having authority on their own. They're just having only delegated authority from the Pope. But this is clarified here where it is they have the authority on their own. And so the bishops say, hey, Vatican, you need to go back into the details and work out exactly what pertains to the Vatican and exactly what pertains to the individual here, right? So, because the individual bishop, right? And so that's really something that happened. You could say in many ways that this wasn't completed until at least 1983 with the new Code of Canon Law. But that's a little complicated. But that gives you an idea, right? So paragraph 10 is also talking about the Curia. What it's talking about is needing for wider representation, right? So the Curia historically started, and even the cardinals historically started, as Roman or Central Italian even, right? So if you go back 500 years, almost all the cardinals and almost all the people working in the Curia were Rome or around Rome. Now, there are bishops all over the world, but just at the time, because of languages, because of travel things, almost all the people were, Central Italy, near Rome, right? Rome is pretty close to the center of Italy, a little on one coast, but Italy is like more long and narrow. So it's about center, north, south, right? And from there, maybe somewhere like the Archbishop of Florence or something like that, but that's not that far from Rome and things like that, right? So, but what it slowly got to, and especially after Vatican II, is the idea of making it more universal, having wider representation. And that's what this number gets to. So let's read it. 10a. Furthermore, since these departments are established for the good of the universal church, it is desirable that their members, officials, and consultors, as well as the legates of the Roman Pontiff, be more widely taken from various regions of the church, insofar as is possible. In such a way, the offices and central organs of the Catholic Church will exhibit a truly universal character. 10b. It is also desired that some bishops too, especially diocesan bishops, will be chosen as members of departments, for they will be able to report more fully to the Supreme Pontiff the thinking, the desires, and the needs of all the churches. Finally, the Fathers of the Council think it would be most advantageous if some departments would listen more attentively to laymen who are outstanding for their virtue, knowledge, and experience. In such a way, they will have an appropriate share in church affairs. Right, so we're talking about the history, and really, because Vatican I was kind of cut short, the last real discussion of this was back in Trent, almost 500 years before this. And so the idea is the church has grown in the world a lot since Trent. There have been a lot of changes, and the church has grown a lot in the Americas and Africa and Asia and things like that. And so we have to look at, how they're going to be represented in the Curia, because the Curia is the governing body of the Pope, but it should not just be the governing body of, the central Italy. No, it should be Italy. It should be the governing body of the whole church. So they want to have this universality, right? So you get the people from all over. So like Father Dermot, who we're talking to, he worked on the Office of Bishops for a while. He's Irish originally. He had worked in the U.S. as a priest as well, because, he's in a congregation that had, the Legionaries of Christ, and we didn't have a whole lot of places where we're doing work in the English language, right? And then have diocesan bishops on committee, right? So it's not just the ones in Rome, not just the ones in the office, but have these committees that meet maybe, once every few years to ask for things to get it from all the bishops, right? They know what the issues are. They know what the desires of the faithful are, things like that from all over the world. And then also laity, not just priests and bishops, right? Seek those with virtue, seek those who can do a lot to help the church. So that concludes today. Thank you for listening to this episode of Vatican II in a Year. This is a listener-supported podcast, and you can donate to help StarQuest produce it and other great podcasts at sqpn.com/give. You can give one-time, monthly, or join the StarQuest Patreon. Tomorrow, we're going to continue on the next paragraphs of Christus Dominus, which is 11 to 12 on bishops assigned to this diocese, this specific diocese, right? Please join us then to learn more about Vatican II, which provide a blueprint for the Catholic Church. Go to sqpn.com/Vatican, frmatthewlc.com/Vatican, or Vatican SQPN on Facebook and X for more information on the podcast, such as playlists for individual documents and a reading plan. As I noted at the beginning about my own website having a contact form, we also set up an email for questions and comments at Vatican2@sqpn.com, Vatican, the number 2 at sqpn.com, and my website, frmatthewlc.com, has that contact form. Amen.